We are a week out from the trade deadline, and the Astros have their list. We'll see what Santa Brown leaves under Dusty's tree. It's episode 33 of Stone Cold Stros, and it starts right now.
The Houston Astros, world champions!
Welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange, joined by senior content contributor Charlie Palillo. He writes a weekly blog for sportsmap.com. Follow him on Twitter at Palillo. Also joined by sportsmap.com editor Josh Jordan. Follow him on Twitter at JoshJordan975. Be sure to hit like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. The full version of the podcast, it's already up right now in audio form at places like Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. And when you're not listening to us, make sure you're listening to ESPN 97.5, 92.5 on your radio dial. Did I say that right? ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 on your radio dial. Charlie, it's episode 33. Normally there are a few options. Last week there was literally one option for 32. This week I'm going to say there's practically one option. No disrespect to John Mayberry, but tell us something interesting about the one and only Astros pitcher, Mike Scott.
Well, I was actually prepared to go with John Mayberry and leave Mike Scott to you, but I will adapt and throw a little scuffed split finger action on this one. Had a 20-win season. It was not 1986 when he won the Cy Young Award and was incredible and dominated and scared the bejeebers out of the Mets. The ultimate what-if game probably in Astros history. Well, other than maybe if A.J. Hinch handles the pitching decisions in Game 7 a little different against the Nationals. But if the Astros had beaten the Mets in that all-timer Game 6, 16 innings where the Mets won the pennant at the Astrodome, with Mike Scott looming for a seventh game, may well have been the Astros' first ever World Series appearance, would have been 37 years ago in 1986. Had to wait a good while after that, but not because of Mike Scott that they had to wait.
I tell you what, keep that juicy John Mayberry material. I think what we're going to do is since we didn't do this until a few dozen episodes into this, maybe once we hit 100, maybe we'll just do the first few on the front end of the 100 episodes. I also, before we get into our topic, want to give a shout out to my vet, Dr. Bush. We've been taking our animals to him for a couple of years, and we found out he and his family are listeners to the podcasts. So shout out Dr. Bush. All right, guys. So let's get into it. We go from Astros pitching legend to a guy we all hoped was on that path after his dominance last year. Christian Javier's struggles this season have been well documented over the past month, and it started in the Mets series where he really couldn't get out of that third inning, and he went into that game with a 2.90 ERA. 5 starts later, finds himself with a 4.32 ERA. And I have a hard time putting a lot of stock into pitching performances against the A's, but at this point, I'll take what I can get, especially when Framber has also struggled. His partner in crime at the top of the rotation there has struggled as well, not to the same extent, but those guys started the first month of this season with the league's best ERA for a 1-2 combo. How are we feeling now about Houston's 1-2 punch?
Framber, I expect to be fine. If anything, maybe he was just due to level off a little. And that was then impacted by the ankle problem before the break and then the minor calf tweak. I expect Framber to be fine. If not, Javier, you never know when a guy will catch a second wind. Will they mix in a little six-man or with off days, skip him another turn here or there? Do they fortify the rotation and give them alternatives to Christian Javier, who was very good over the first 3 months or so of the season, but not dominant, right? Giving up many more hits than he did last year, not striking out guys the way that he did last year, which could have been a good thing if you're pitching more efficiently, harnessing pitch counts and so forth. But it's quite obvious the workload of last season plus the first half of this season, whether you want to call it a dead arm. You mentioned anything against Oakland, you have to grade on a curve. Gave up just one hit in 5 2/3, but walked 6 guys. Dusty was actually right to pull him. Phil Maton failed in that game. So Javier's a colossal concern because when you get Jose Urquidy back after a couple more rehab starts in the minors, it's not like you're thinking that Urquidy's going to come back and be an ace number 2 type starter. He's never been that in his career. Hunter Brown, which way's the pendulum going to swing on him the rest of the way? JP France, meanwhile, just keep on trucking. So their rotation just clearly is not the level of when they were 4 or 5 deep with really good guys, or Verlander, Cole, 1-2. Fromber and a lot of crossed fingers right now.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about Fromber, but 4 or more earned runs in 3 of his last 5 starts. So that's not very Fromber-like. I'm going to chalk a lot of that up. He's kind of pitching through some nagging injuries. I think he'll be fine, but that you expect a little more from Fromber. Javier, I'm a little more optimistic. I mean, these last 2 starts, they've been a whole lot better than the ones before that. That's for sure. Strikeouts are going up. That's a good sign. It looks like that release point is starting to get resolved. They're figuring that out. I remember right before the playoffs started last year when Javier he kept flying open with that shoulder, and Julia Morales did a piece about how he kind of figured that out, and that's why he got a lot better and didn't walk as many people heading into the playoffs last year. So I almost feel like we're getting the Javier before he figured out that little mechanical adjustment where he was a little more wild last year. But that's okay. It's a step in the right direction, and I'm also encouraged with Javier because of Hunter Brown. We're seeing the same stuff from him. These are guys that have never pitched this much in their career, and they're kind of going through it right now. That's why I'd like to see them grab some more pitching here before the deadline so they can not have to have those guys throw so much, have them a little more fresh when they really need them.
Fromber's struggles are curious because he's a ground ball pitcher who is seeming to not induce the ground ball right now. But Christian Javier, I almost wonder if he's a little out of shape. Just visually, he appears to be a little out of shape. And so then I wonder too, do you guys wonder how much of the pitch clock now is having an impact on the performances of these guys and kind of their adaptation to that?
Well, if so, shame on them. In Javier's case, he's 26 years old. He's a big sweater. Some guys are just big sweaters. I can't say I've really put video last year to this year to look as he spent some of that $64 million in the chow line. I'm just going to go with the fairly clear evidence that blowing through his career high in innings work last year, followed by being on pace to blow through that number this year, has caught up with him. At least there's been no injury attached to it. You hope there's not any sort of underlying issue. A career is not always linear. So maybe Javier settles back to where, 4 years from now, we're saying 5 years, $64 million for him was a steal. But year 1 at this point, no steal.
Nah, and his spin for his curveball is looking pretty good. It's his fastball spin, which is affecting Javier, and we know that's kind of the magic of that pitch for him. But just looking at the numbers, he's 48th percentile for fastball spin this year. Last year, 79th percentile. So that's a big difference, and that's a pitch he relies on a ton.
A name that keeps getting brought up in trade rumors is Justin Verlander, obviously, because the Mets suck and a lot of teams need starting pitching, the Astros being one of those. And by the way, I'll be Captain Obvious for a second. The Mets went from the poster child of going for it all to the poster child of why you can't buy championships. We've talked about how the Astros don't have any top 100 prospects in their farm to trade. But JV has a no trade clause, so he gets to pick the destination. The Mets may not necessarily be looking to unload JV. They may just want to retool their roster, considering how much they did invest into that roster this past offseason. But they also may not want to be on the hook for that $43 million that is guaranteed to him, as he has not looked Cy Young caliber this year and is carrying a 5.18 ERA on the road. Could we see one more run with JV in the H?
Follow the money. Verlander's ERA over his last 7 starts is about 250. So not Cy Young Justin Verlander of 2022, but 250 is pretty darn fine. But this is about how much pay down might Steve Cohen offer. Verlander, as you said, can turn down somewhere else. Would he turn down the Dodgers? Right? I don't think he's going to the Rays or the Diamondbacks. I don't think Kate's acting career is really taken off, right? So Hollywood might not have the lure it might have in years gone past. Obviously had great success here, has great familiarity here. would they be gung-ho about coming back here? But it's about the contract, right? Jim Crane and the Astros, eminently defensively, had no interest in bidding at the level that it took to sign Verlander. He's making $43.33333 million this year, another $43.333 million next year. And if he throws 140 innings next season, not an incredible workload, well, there's a $35 million vest for 2025 when he'll be 42 years old. So the Astros are not going to give up any sort of prospect capital and take on that contract. So everything in life's supposedly negotiable. If the Mets would pay down half of that contract, what does it impact on what prospects you give back? What's the number where Jim Crane's thinking, well, if I can get Verlander for $25 million for next year and pro rata at that salary for this year, and then what do you do about that vesting option in 2025? Make sure he throws no more than 139 2/3 innings next year. So I think a lot of tumblers would have to click into place, but it's kind of fun to think about.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about how much money it is, but if you took what Michael Brantley's making this year, and then you took what Abreu's making this year, and then you throw in Montero, and that's what Verlander's getting paid. I mean, I know hindsight's 2020 and everything, but you just look at if they would have spent that money a little differently. I mean, couldn't a Dubon played first base? And there's not a huge difference right there. I know Dubon's kind of come out of nowhere, but it's funny. I look back at Dubon's stats, and he had a really poor year last year. But the years before that, he wasn't nearly as poor a hitter. So I think we have a little bit of a different view of Dubon here because we weren't familiar with his career until he came to Houston. But yeah, I'd like to see him go after JV. They need pitching. The window, who knows how much longer they're going to have this thing open. I say go for it, but it's not my money. So we'll see what Jim Crane wants to do.
It is not our money, but Dana Brown, if he wants to make a splash, that is a name that would be very splashy. That's it for part 1 of Stone Cold Stros. To listen to the full podcast, it's up right now at your favorite podcast provider. And to watch the rest of this conversation on YouTube, check out the Stone Cold Stros playlist. We'll be releasing those videos very shortly. And as always, go Stros.